Hello, this is KYC News. We provide you with the most up-to-date and reliable information for the day. First and foremost, we want to achieve perfect health with a sincere desire. Israelis exercise in a deserted area dubbed Mini Gaza. China strongly rejects U.S. ban on Xinjiang-related products imports. China strongly rejects U.S. ban on Xinjiang-related products imports. China vehemently disagrees with the U.S.'s restriction on the importation of any Xinjiang-related goods. According to a spokesperson for China's Ministry of Commerce, the U.S. action is a classic example of economic coercion that will gravely affect the interests of businesses and consumers in both nations and will not promote the stability of global industrial and supply networks. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) made the statements after declaring on Tuesday that all goods produced in northwest China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region involved alleged forced labor and that imports of any goods connected to the region were prohibited under the U.S. purported Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, according to the Global Times. The spokesperson stated that the U.S. is engaging in significant unilateralism and protectionism, undermining market principles, and breaking WTO regulations in the name of promoting human rights. The U.S. strategy does not support reducing global inflation and reviving the global economy. In reality, forced labor is expressly forbidden by Chinese law. All ethnic groups in Xinjiang have complete freedom and equality in employment and labor, and associated laws effectively protect their rights and interests. Additionally, the quality of life for residents is continuously rising. Urban people disposable income in Xinjiang climbed from 23,000 yuan. $3,433.90, to 37,600 yuan between 2014 and 2021, while rural residents' disposable income increased from roughly 8,700 yuan to 15,600 yuan. With more than 3.06 million rural poor people in Xinjiang being pulled out of poverty by the end of 2020, poverty had also been addressed. The integrated mechanization level in cotton sewing in Xinjiang has currently surpassed more than 98% in most regions, therefore the assertions of alleged forced labor in the area are simply untrue. According to the ministry, the U.S.'s implementation of a complete ban on goods from Xinjiang under the pretext of forced labor amounts to the deprivation of the labor rights and development rights of all ethnic groups in Xinjiang, which will de facto result in forced non-labor and cause unemployment and even a return to poverty. The evidence demonstrates that the U.S. true goals are to damage China's reputation, meddle in its internal affairs, limit China's development, and threaten the prosperity and stability of Xinjiang. The U.S. must stop promptly interfering with the rights and interests of members of all Xinjiang ethnic groups, engaging in political manipulation and distorted attacks, and imposing sanctions and repressive policies pertaining to Xinjiang. The spokesperson stated that China will take the appropriate steps to preserve its interests in national security, development, and the legitimate rights and interests of all ethnic groups in the area. The ministry expects that the U.S. will do more to support the stability of industrial and supply chains as well as economic recovery, establishing circumstances for furthering economic and trade cooperation, in light of the high inflation and slow development of the global economy. Israelis exercise in a deserted area dubbed Mini Gaza. An isolated village in southern Israel that has only experienced wars filled with the sound of the Muslim call to prayer. Its 500 structures, the tallest of which is 8 floors, are derelict. Militant paintings and posters honoring dead Palestinian militants line its winding lanes. No map can show where it is. The Urban Warfare Training Center is its official name. It is known as Mini Gaza by the Israeli forces that conduct military exercises here. Towards the end of the Second Palestinian Intifada, or uprising, against Israeli control, the military started construction on the $45 million facility in the Zelim Army Base in 2005. Israeli forces had fought Palestinian insurgents in numerous towns and cities throughout the occupied West Bank and Gaza over the preceding 5 years. Israel has since engaged in 4 wars in Gaza against the Islamic militant organization Hamas, several of which broke out in heavily populated cities and refugee camps. According to the UN, more than 4,000 Palestinians have died, more than half of them were civilians. According to Israeli sources, 106 individuals have perished on their side, including soldiers, civilians, and visitors. Israel has been accused of deploying excessive force in densely populated residential areas during each of its wars, adding to the number of civilian casualties. While accusing Palestinian militants of employing civilians as human shields, the military asserts that it makes every effort to spare them. The facility's commander, Colonel Eli Beals, declared that the character of combat has altered. Today, the majority of our fighting takes place in near built-up areas. The roughly 60-acre, quarter-square-kilometer, facility is designed to mimic the urban settings in which Israel's soldiers frequently operate. It includes narrow alleyways, dull concrete buildings, and open spaces. These may include Gaza, the West Bank, and southern Lebanon, where Israel has warned that future conflict with militants of Hezbollah is likely to occur. Murals with Arabic slogans and images of terrorists from Palestine and Lebanon are painted on the streets by the Army's single authorized graffiti artist. In between drills, soldiers relax in the shade of the buildings and smoke cigarettes beneath worn-out posters, some of which pay tribute to Israeli combatants who have died. Others dress as militants for an impending practice by donning red and white striped scarves. According to Beals, the training facility can host exercises for a whole brigade of 2,000 soldiers at once. Additional forces from European partners, most recently Cypriot soldiers, and visiting American troops have trained at Mini Gaza. However, the training facility transforms into a ghost town with creaking metal and vacant chambers as the guns go silent and the soldiers leave. Putin makes an effort to defend the unjustifiable. The arguments put up by the Russian government to support its invasion of Ukraine, the bloodiest and most damaging military operation in Europe since World War II, are unpersuasive. Although Russian President Vladimir Putin has focused mostly on the threat of Ukraine joining NATO in defending the Russian invasion, that action, had it taken place, would have been completely legal under international law. Membership in military alliances is not prohibited by the UN Charter, which is a document of international law. In fact, there are a ton of such coalitions in place. 6 countries from Eastern Europe and Central Asia make up the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is now led by Russia. Putin's focus on NATO is, of course, justified by the idea that the presence of a NATO country on Russia's border poses a threat to the country's security. But why are Russia's national security worries more important than those of neighboring countries, especially those that Russia or the Soviet Union had previously invaded and snatched up as territory? Furthermore, if an anticipated threat to national security constitutes legal justification for a military invasion, many nations would be justified in launching military assaults. The Western alliance has never attacked Russia in the 73 years that NATO has existed, raising doubts about the level of threat NATO poses to Russia. Furthermore, practically speaking, Ukraine's accession to NATO was not imminent prior to the Russian invasion because important NATO countries were against it. In fact, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine offered to have Ukraine give up its desire to join NATO and become a neutral country late in March of this year, more than 2 months ago. However, the Russian government does not consider the cessation of the alleged NATO threat to be a good enough cause to terminate the invasion. Instead, the Russian military effort continues, intensifying in ferocity and devastation. Putin's assertion that Ukraine has to be denazified is particularly flimsy. Fascists are present in Ukraine, as they are in the majority of other countries. However, in contrast to many other countries where fascist ideologies are pervasive, where there are powerful right-wing political parties, and where fascists are actively involved in the government, right-wingers in Ukraine receive only about 2% of the vote, have just 1 representative in the parliament, and have no representatives in the executive branch. It's important to note that the majority of the combat force was either killed or captured during the Russian siege of Mariupol, given that Russia's greatly exaggerated claim of Nazi rule of Ukraine is mainly reliant on the existence of fascists inside the Azov regiment. Ironically, and hypocritically, Putin has consistently supported fascist parties in Eastern Europe. Whatever the excuses, there is no doubt that the enormous Russian military invasion of Ukraine violates the UN Charter, which all parties to the conflict have signed. The Charter's Article 2 states that all members should refrain in their international dealings from the use of force, including the threat of force, against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The International Court of Justice declared on March 16 that Russia must cease its military actions in Ukraine, dispelling any lingering doubts about the applicability of this statement to the situation in Ukraine. Following Russia's veto of a similar UN Security Council resolution, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution requesting that Russia immediately, completely, and unconditionally withdraw all of its military personnel from the land of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders by a vote of 141 countries to 5. Russia, North Korea, Syria, Belarus, and Eritrea were the only 5 nations to back the Russian position. Even some of Russia's closest allies, like China and Cuba, chose to abstain rather than support Russia's breaking of the law. The Russian campaign in Ukraine is unquestionably an imperialist war, in addition to being illegal. One of the most powerful militaries in the world is attacking a much smaller, weaker country with the express intention of annexing all or a portion of Ukraine to the Russian Empire. By signing the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, the Russian government legally reaffirmed its commitment to respecting Ukraine's independence and sovereignty. However, in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea and militarily engaged in eastern Ukraine to back pro-Russian separatists. Putin denied the existence of an independent Ukrainian country in a lengthy public address he made in July 2021. Then he said that Ukraine was Russian country, 3 days before the huge Russian invasion of February 24, 2022. Putin compared himself to Peter the Great, the Russian Tsar of the 18th century, whom he hailed for waging decades of war to retake Russian land from foreign authority, in an obvious reference to his military conquest of Ukraine, this June. Of course, Putin and his supporters are right when they point out that other powerful nations have occasionally disregarded international law and consensus. However, that appalling standard for international behavior might be used to justify anything, including genocide, nuclear war, and even torture. It scarcely serves as a prescription for the fair and peaceful world that citizens of all countries are entitled to.